Hi, everyone. My name is Sara Winick, and today I am joined by the amazing Majda Gama for this edition of Brownback Lit's interview series, Lattes Lit. In today's interview, I'll be talking with Majda, who is a poet and the author of the award-winning book, The Call of Paradise. To get more interviews and content like Lattes Lit, make sure to subscribe to our channel by hitting the subscribe button below and click the link in our bio to get more events and information from Brownback Lit. So thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing surprisingly okay. Thank you. It's actually a beautiful morning over here in Northern Virginia.
That's amazing. Um, yeah, so just to get started, you've accomplished so much in your career so far. You have multiple publications, you've contributed to so many panels and have so many writing awards. But I was hoping we could start off this chat with you talking some more about your latest publication, The Call of Paradise.
Right, I have it right here actually.
Oh,
I'm gonna
cool.
grab it and hold it up because I love it. The Call of Paradise was it won the two Sylvia's Chapbook Prize last year, and the final judge was Diane Seuss, who won the Pulitzer for poetry last year for her amazing book, Frank Sonnets. Um, that book was a huge influence in my life. I won't say that it influenced the creation of The Call of Paradise. The Call of Paradise came about really honestly because I'd sort of been carrying around a full length manuscript for 10 years that felt really dead in the water and I needed to play.
Mhm.
And I'd had two poems accepted, very new poems accepted in an issue of the Michigan Quarterly Review, New Voices from the Middle East and North Africa. And I thought, well, why not use those poems as the launching point to something new? And it's going to be a chapbook, and I'm going to title it after the final poem in the book. I knew how to end it. And I
Mhm.
just grabbed actually from a craft wise, I grabbed some odds and sods, some odd poems that I just didn't know what they were doing. Maybe they were fragments or aphoristic or just, they were just in conversation with themselves. And that's how that chapbook came to be. I really had zero expectations for it. And so when Diane Seuss read it, loved it, and wrote what she wrote about it, I mean, I pretty much changed my life.
Amazing. I know you mentioned that like you kind of had naming it after the ending poem. There was like some fragments. What was like I guess like is starting a book or like a project like that the hardest part, like finding that like first starting point when you're going through that process?
Yes. Yes. I probably just made it sound like, I was struck by inspiration and it ended in one day. I assembled it. Um, no, I basically am sort of like a serial workshop taker. I really
Mhm.
love tapping into the writers who live in this local area in the DMV. And Melanie Figg is an amazing poet and teaches a lot of workshops at the Writers Center and online
Yeah.
for various organizations about organizing your writing into books or chapbooks, or, she has a very generous idea of genre. So I wasn't even thinking that this is, every piece in The Call of Paradise is a poem. I just thought of it as being, this is The Call of Paradise. And that's what I went with. But I sort of started, she got the ball rolling. I was thinking a lot about putting a collection together that was maybe genreless, or what is genre. There are prose poems in the book.
Mhm.
So I really utilized my entire community to kickstart this book.
Yeah, that's great. I was also going to ask, I know you also worked as a poetry editor at Tinderbox Poetry Journal. So whether with The Call of Paradise or other projects that you've worked on, how does your experience, I guess, being the editor, but then also being the writer kind of inform each other? Does it make it more difficult, less difficult? Is it harder to, I guess, do one over the other when you've been on both sides of that process?
That's a great question. I'm also a guest editor at the moment for a Middle Eastern
Mhm.
journal called RHINO. And it's been a couple of years since I left Tinderbox. I went from reader to editor to briefly running it until we got an editor-in-chief in place and brought on Thoraya El-Montasser as poetry editor, Jeremy Hensley. They were wonderful people I felt like I could step away from that. So I'm back in the editing process again with sort of pan-Arab group of creative nonfiction writers, fiction writers, and poets, and people are in Saudi and they're in Egypt and they're on Montreal time, and we're all trying to make it work. When I was at Tinderbox, curating issues, going through poetry and seeing really big names come through the queue, and then also seeing, of course, most of the time you're not going to see any name that you know, and that's such a privilege, and wanting to privilege those voices more than the big names that come through, and that was the best part, I think, of being an editor. As to how it influenced my own writing, it actually kind of made me weary a bit of my own voice. Like, I'm not going to lie, burnout is very real. So I don't know if you, Sara, have been editing as well. It's how it's hard. How do you remove yourself from the process when poetry is your love and your art form and what you do? So editing is a tough job.
It is a tough job. I've not as a poetry editor, but I've worked at my school newspaper as an editor for a few years now. And I think, like, especially with creative writing, it's so hard to kind of yield that creative control because, like you said, like, it's an art, it's like part of you, it's your voice, and it's hard sometimes to hear edits or sacrifice parts of that for the clarity of the piece or how it's working or whatever it is. So yeah,
Exactly.
it's not easy.
And people have said, "Oh, just publish what you love," and it's like, well, I can't. Just that would be like monoculture.
Yeah.
It'd be like a field of oak trees. Like, I can't do that. I have to curate. I have to, really listen on a different level. And this new journal that I'm editing, Riwayat, I thought I was going to get to pick the theme as guest editor. It's picked for me. And the theme is joy, and it's not a very joyful time in the world. So it's actually been really profound for me to sit and pick and go through these poems and actually do some rewrites of some very raw poems and try to work with young poets on that. It's been a joy, rather a cliche thing to think about, but it's brought me back to the joy of writing poetry and the poetry community and what is possible with poetry.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely. I know you said, like, cliche, but true. I mean, so much of writing, I think, is like community with other writers and with audiences and at its core. So definitely an important part of that. Two of the poems of yours that I really loved were I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, Ghazal Warning, and In the City of Eve. They're both really beautifully written, but they're also in, like, considerably different forms when it comes to poetry, where Morning is more in, like, couplets and Eve is, like, kind of more of a free verse or prose, almost like form of poetry. As you've written over time, do you feel yourself kind of gravitate to one form over the other? Does it depend on the topic? Anything like that?
Yeah, I think I've been resisting the call to write mostly in Middle Eastern forms or Westernized Middle Eastern forms. There's even been some new forms invented, like the Arabic by Marwa Halal, which is pretty cool. So kind of bang my head up against sonnets a lot of time. I feel like I must learn to conquer them. And lately I've sort of just said to myself, well, I'm not going to write a sonnet, but I'll write 14 lines and see if that works, if that does what the sonnet does. But I'm not going to tell this creature you're a sonnet. But if I had I think that, oh boy, the kitten on the countertop. Okay,
Wants to be
she can do
involved.
that.
She wants to come.
She can do that. She just
Yes.
went and got the toy and jumped off. She's been good. I think that, yeah, I think I would love to just write in like, especially when delving into ancestral memory or personal history forms like the Ghazal, what I did within the city of Eve, creating these linked, a linked timeline. For sure, I should go back to that. And I was always told by David Keplinger, who teaches at American
Yeah.
University, if something worked for you, then go back and do it again. But I try, I still think of myself as a very young emerging writer, young in career. So I'm still trying new things. And maybe at this point in time, I should, just go ahead and use what I'm comfortable with. So I don't know. Maybe you're right.
No, yeah, I mean, like I think the like I exploration is so like intrinsic to poetry, but like creative writing in general, there's so many places you can go with it. I like your idea about like kind of, well, I'm not going to write a sonnet, but I'm going to write something, and maybe it is a sonnet, but I won't give it that label because I mean, like separate. I mean, sonnets are hard. They're like not easy to write at all. So it's, yeah, I think it's a good method, and definitely like going back to things that work for you. I think at times can feel kind of like boxed in for writers because then you feel like you're kind of just doing the same thing, but also like if it works, it works. So yeah, it's a good mix, like you said. One of the other publications that you worked on was We Call to the Eye and the Night, Love Poems by Writers of Arab Heritage. What was it like, I guess, working on a poetry collection with so many other authors and collaborators? And, especially comparing that to when you've written your own collections, is it like, how collaborative was it? Did you get to talk to the other writers, or was it kind of just people sending things in and then the editors like piece it together?
Oh, I'm merely a contributor.
Got
I
it.
I wish I could say that I was part of that process, but I know for Zaina Hashimbeck and Hala Alian,
Hmm.
it was a long process. They reached out to the poets maybe 4 years ago, 5 years ago now, saying, "Hey, we love your poems, and we had this crazy idea, and we're going to do this." And they hadn't even found a publisher yet. So I was like, well, I am the wrong person to go to for love poems because I don't think I write love poetry. But what they ended up creating was they went with it. I don't know if you've seen the issue.
Hmm.
It is I've never seen an anthology of love poems like this. It's not trite, it's cliche, it's sensuous, it just sprawls across the world and in different voices. And there's queer love, and there's asexual love, and there's classical Islamic love, like the tropes from that poetry world. And it has a sort of everything everywhere all at once quality where
Yes.
that really reflects Arab Anglophone writing in the now, because it's not just writing of diaspora, it's writing from people who are in these cities. You know, there's I'm not the only writer of Saudi heritage in that book. There's another woman from my generation who has since passed on, and I can't. That really was pretty stunning looking it up. That took so long for this anthology to come together, and that we lost someone, and there's really nothing like it in the pub world. This journal, I should be reading from it at AWP in February, and I'm looking forward to celebrating it.
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't gotten to read the whole collection, but I did get to look through the list of different contributors and some of like the contents of it, and it seems really cool. You've already kind of touched on this throughout like the whole interview, really, but just kind of to go focus back and like poetry and creative writing in general, identity and our experiences inform so much of our writing. Sometimes that's a really cathartic process. Sometimes it's also like a really heavy emotional burden to unpack, depending on the severity of what we're writing about. For you, how do your own life experiences, your identity kind of play into your writing? Is it something that you feel motivates you, something that comes naturally, anything like that?
Mhm. Well, I have to say, when I started writing poetry, I think I've been published in every decade of my life, no joke, even at
Wow,
the age of 11.
that's great.
Um, yeah, it's such a funny story. It was at summer camp, and here in Northern Virginia. Spent the summers in the US and the school year in Saudi Arabia, and
Hmm.
we had a rainy day in and we were taught to write poems. And the poem I wrote was not about being an Arab girl or the smelly food we ate at home. It was just about a rainbow. So, like, of all the cliched things, but my mother it was published in the local newspaper. My mother cut it out, sent it to my American grandmother, all of that. So, literally, the first things I wrote were about what I observe around me. And I feel like I'm still doing that. It took a lot of courage, I think, on my part to bring in family heritage. And I did so in the 9/11 era. And I did it deliberately because from a much maligned ethnic heritage. And my father was a Saudi national. And we were just being sort of stereotyped, have always been stereotyped. And there was just an explosion of writing at that time from people who were, I guess we called ourselves Arab American or other hyphenated Asians, because it was so indiscriminate. The backlash against anyone who just looked like they were from that region, a humongous region that, ranges from, there are Muslims in Indonesia and all the way just across the world, China, anyone who was wearing a skull cap. That's when I felt, I wouldn't say rage, but I felt a responsibility to communicate the complexities, not just my own individual hybridity, but of the times we're in, the complexities of the time we're in. I really wish that I could just write about rainbows, and I've been trying to write eco poetry lately, and I don't think I'm very good at it, or maybe I'm just not used to it, but we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, yeah, it's sometimes definitely reading about rainbows and all that, that's the easier way, but sometimes there's a greater call, like you said. And I mean, the writing you do have is a really beautiful reflection of that intent. So just kind of wrapping everything up, I know you've kind of touched on some things that you're working on, but is there anything that you have coming out, anything you're participating in that you want to give a shout out for, just looking to the future?
Oh man, thank you.
Yeah, of
Well,
course.
I mean, I really want people to read We Call to the Eye in the Night.
Mhm.
That's, like I said, an extraordinary collection. Um, I am being anthologized in a future anthology of Arab American writing that's being edited by Hayan Sharara and Carolina Ibaid.
Mhm.
I don't know who's publishing that, but Hayan was responsible for the last sort of anthology of new Arab American writing about 20 years ago. So he's updating it. So that's something to look forward to. But my big dream pub is the winter issue of Plowshares that I'll be in. I have a ghazal coming out in that. So I'm going to be shouting that from the rooftops probably.
Yeah,
So,
definitely. That's amazing. And
oh,
definitely for, yeah.
and I'll be reading in January in Reston, Virginia at Reston Readings. And I'm trying to do a reading at the Writers Center, but we'll see. I'm having to teach myself the newly published ways of getting your book out in the world. So
Yeah. Well, we'll definitely put your website link and everything in the description for this video, and we'll keep an eye out for that. Thank you so much again for joining us today. Like I said, to get more interviews and content like Lattes and Lit, make sure to subscribe to our channel below and check out the link in bio to get more information from Brown Bag Lit. Thank you so much again for joining us today. This has been a really great conversation.
thank you for the conversation,
Of
Sarah, and
course.
thanks to Chloe as well for the invitation.
Of course.